Alrighty, thanks. Everyone, thank you so much for coming. We have a wonderful turnout today. Make sure everyone gets one of these handouts and get some extras because what's on the back is sort of worth the price of the handout. It gives you a complete list of, a huge list of resources to help you get informed about defending your faith. So take some extras, bring some for your friends. And so today's lecture is the second half of the Culture War lecture. So in last week's lecture, you learned sort of about the history of the Culture War. Now it started when the deists, in reaction to these religious wars, sought to undermine belief in the Christian worldview. But due to the intellectual weakening of the American intellect, the American Christian intellect, due to the Great Awakening revivals, all right, I'm sorry, Brad, is your camera okay? Is it working? Cool. Awesome. So due to the weakening of the intellect, the attack by the secularists of like Freud and Marx and Darwin onto the American shores, we didn't have much of a resistance to it. We were too enamored with this kind of emotional-based Christianity. And so, but today, opposition in America to the Christian worldview is mainly fueled by what's called the sexual liberation movement, and that's things like transgenderism, the kind of stuff you see in the California restrooms, the same-sex marriage, that sort of thing. That's the main fuel that's going against the traditional Christian worldview. In fact, moral relativism itself, that's very popular in the universities, and that is almost wholly sexual. No one defends nuclear war, or oil spills, or dumping pollutants into a reservoir, or insider trading, or even smoking on the basis of moral relativism. It's pretty much sexual acts that are defended on that basis. And this is why people spend so much time trying to undermine the Christian worldview, the perversions that are done in some of these countries. That and more happened in pre-Christian Europe. I won't go into details, but there was some nasty stuff going on before Europe became Christianized. And now this liberation movement is seeking to turn the clock back to the pre-Christian days of Europe and impose that on all of Western society. That's why they want to undermine the Christian worldview. So the question is, how do we fight back? How can we stop them? And if so, how do we stop them? So I think the first thing we need to do is recognize, at least in America, that we have more than enough resources to do this. We still have about 20% of the American population calls itself evangelical. So we have the numbers. And also we have the money as well. The EFCA is an accrediting organization for evangelical charities. And just to those accredited organizations, evangelicals gave $10 billion last year. That doesn't even include like all these churches. That's just these parachurch organizations. So we've got tons of money and we've got tons of people. The question is, how do we mobilize this into something that impacts the culture? We also need to understand that activity isn't the same as productivity. Spending lots of time in some activity isn't the same as doing something that actually makes a difference. You can do lots of inefficient activities. And we need to also know that evangelism is different than culture shaping. We're called to both, but the two are very different from each other. And Billy Graham noted this when he admitted that his crusades, despite winning enormous numbers of converts, didn't affect the state of American culture very much. The culture was pretty much as secularized at the end of his crusades as it was at the beginning. And asking whether we should do one or the other is sort of like asking whether you should shower or brush your teeth. It's like, I mean, that very question just makes me wonder about you. So it's the same thing with doing evangelism or culture shaping. So we need to do both. So culture shaping is different by the way it is practiced. For example, things like being a good person are very good for evangelism, but they're not the big things for culture shaping. For example, the big culture shapers of the 20th century you have, like the Nazis in Germany, or the communists in the Soviet Union, and even advocates for transgenderism and same-sex marriage in the US today. They're like historically, none of these people have been known as nice and good people. These aren't necessarily known as the best loving your neighbor types. Yet they've had enormous influence on their respective cultures. So culture shaping really deals with the question, from what sources do we get our information about the world? So the vast majority of the public, it gets their information from public schools, for one, secular universities, the news media and entertainment television, like the late night shows, even like Jimmy Kimmel. Jon Stewart is actually a huge source of information for a lot of college-age students, which is very sad because even he doesn't consider it real news, but lots of young people get their news from people like him. And so we, the evangelicals, will not really begin to wield significant additional cultural influence until we have substantial representation in all four of these fields. And so the next 2 points we're going to go through is 1, get informed, and 2, get involved. Those are the 2 ways that we are going to win the culture war away from the anti-Christian world. So if we can ask, how is it I could possibly make any difference at all? The first thing you need to recognize is this: you are not special. I mean, that's maybe a shock to some of you, but all those children's books and TV shows that say, well, if you just keep dreaming, right, you'll one day become that astronaut or rock star or whatever. You see this in like Disney's Planes, or I think there's like some Turbo Slug movie that also has the same message. It's like, they're lying to you. They're just, they're making you feel good, but they're lying to you. But of course, it also means that the people who are successful aren't really special. And when I say special, I mean like uniquely talented in a way that if they wait enough time, they're guaranteed success. Like even Dr. Craig is not special in that sense. Alvin Plantinga, Stephen Hawking, not special in that sense. Like Dr. Craig didn't become the world's leading debate apologist because there's something special, some sort of special, unique thing about him. People tend to think that. But nothing could be farther from the truth. Talent doesn't have all that much to do with success. Dr. Craig really put more time and more effort and more sacrifice into developing his skills than anyone else did. He spent, in his youth, 9 hours a day on doing philosophical research. Multiply that over a couple of decades, and yeah, you too could become like a leading scholar in both philosophy and in like historical Jesus studies. And so that's why Dr. Craig, you can ask him when he gets back. He gets offended at people who say, well, you're just so inherently smart. It's like, no, that's an excuse for the rest of us being lazy. Like there's, like even, I'll skip ahead and say, even in this room, there's more than enough young people. I mean, even with the young people, there's more than enough young people that if you were willing to dedicate that kind of time that Dr. Craig did, we could just with the people in this room, we could pretty much overthrow the culture war. So the question is, it's like, what are you willing to do? How much fun and are you willing to give up? How much hard perseverance are you willing to do? And are you humble enough to try to then get to realize you don't know much and try to get the learning that Dr. Craig did? So how badly do you want to make a difference, and what are you willing to give up to do it? So before you do anything, and this is another prerequisite before any sort of apologetics, make sure you get connected with a small group. The counter-cult apologist James White noted that every single apologetics disaster he has encountered, and that's like people who go into, say, apologetics against Mormons, and eventually just get sucked into the Mormon cult themselves. This happens a lot. In fact, I could even ask Cody over here, do we have the microphone by any chance? Do we have like the microphone for people's questions or not? I see Scott. Yeah, Scott over here. He's getting it ready. Thank you. I was just wondering, I wanted to ask Cody, it's like, I know you've talked to people like this on YouTube, these sort of like apostates who have, at least one in particular. Do you have anything to say? I think it's Noah was the guy's name, right? Yeah, basically. Wait, is the microphone on? No, not yet, not yet. Okay, so it says, yeah, yeah, all right, so yeah, all right. Is it on?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
No, basically, yeah, he was a big Christian apologist and everything. You know, he read, people like Dr. Craig, J.P. Moreland, Alvin Plantinga, all those guys. He was really good. But basically, yeah, it seems like he really hung around almost exclusively, it seems, with a lot of these internet atheists. And then, sadly, about a little over a year and a half ago, he actually became an atheist himself, deconverted, even though he was a Christian apologist and everything.
Yeah, he was highly knowledgeable. He knew his Christian apologetics, but it's like just the people you hang around with. And it's not bad to interact with unbelievers, but you need to be part of that Christian fellowship. Don't you dare try to go at this as some sort of lone wolf apologist. And I say it maybe not to people here because you're part of a church, but maybe the people like on the internet. It's like, yeah, don't go it as a lone wolf apologist. Make sure you're connected to a church before you do this. And the reason is that you're very vulnerable to peer pressure, even when you don't realize it. Like when I studied under the rabbis rabbis at the kollel, they'd sometimes bring up arguments against Christianity, and that seemed pretty devastating at the time. But on Sunday, I would attend church and occasionally mention the arguments to my peers. And even as the words left my mouth, it just seems like the same argument that the rabbis gave, that seemed so overpowering when I heard it first, just seemed so anemic, so weak when I started speaking it to my peers, because I was surrounded by a different group. The plausibility of an argument depends very heavily on who you're sort of surrounded with when you're discussing the argument. And this is why you need to be part of a Christian fellowship as well. So I guess, are there any additional questions regarding anything I've gone over so far? Any maybe questions or comments that anyone has? If you could just raise your hand. I've left the lecture sort of light enough in material that it's like we can get a good back and forth going. Yeah?
Yeah, Drew, I'll just agree with you, what you said about anybody can do this stuff, and it's not so much your natural skill, although that's a little of it. It's more your perseverance. Even as something as different as science, I'm a pretty famous scientist, but my natural skill is, I don't know, a few percent better than the folks who aren't. It's mainly how hard you're willing to work at this stuff.
Do you find it maybe a little bit insulting if people say, "Oh, you're just inherently smart," and they sort of attribute your, because you are one of the leading or the top-cited chemists, I think, in your field, right?
Well, if you narrow it down to quantum chemistry, yeah, I'm pretty well known in that area.
Okay, okay, fine, but still, everything's specialized now. So yeah, you're one of the world's leading quantum chemists, and it's like, yeah, lots of people can do this, but you sort of have to do a lot of perseverance. This isn't like, I take it your status wasn't something that just handed itself over to you. It's like you just believe in yourself a bunch and you dream, and all of a sudden everything just shows up at your door. No, I'm getting kind of a no on that.
Yeah, in fact, it's that's kind of the flip side of it. I've mentored a number of graduate students, and the ones who make it are the ones who really work hard and take it seriously, and they're thinking about science, on the weekend, and that just kind of becomes their life for at least a while when they're in this intensive study phase. And the folks who don't make it are sometimes the ones who come in the most enthusiastic, but they have this kind of dreamer kind of part of it, and the dreamer types never make it.
Okay, I think it's a good thing for all fields. Thanks for your insight. So, all right, so let's continue and start getting the nose to the grindstone here. So the first step is very simple. It's the get informed step. One thing everyone could do is subscribe to a couple of blogs, Apologetics 315. These are all on the list, by the way. I mean, the stuff I'm going to mention here, I already wrote it down. So one of them would be like the Apologetics 315 blog, gives lots of apologetics topics, lectures, gets you connected to those things. Or another is like Wintry Knight. He's a guy I know personally he's like an apologetics guy, but who analyzes and comments on the news. And he has resources, he has connections to just whatever topic you want expertise on. He will connect you to books or to people who are. So let's say if you're debating something like marriage, what is the status of marriage? He'll get you connected to things like, I'll show you, things like this is probably the top book on the subject. If you want to debate marriage, it's called What is Marriage? Man and Woman: A Defense. So if you want to argue like same-sex marriage with people, if I could afford to, I'd send one of these to every pastor, like in America. I'm not kidding. It's like, I figure we might want to just settle on our home county here, but this gives a secular case, like a non-biblical, it's just a secular case for traditional marriage. And this is very important for like the political debates that is going through. For example, with the striking down of the DOMA decision. If you want to sort of keep us from becoming like the pagan Europe, these books are very helpful. Also for abortion, one of the best books, Cody has much more expertise than I do on this, but one of the best books is The Case for Life by Scott Klusendorf. Also lots of secular arguments showing that even many atheists are actually, like Christopher Hitchens actually, or late Christopher Hitchens, are actually pro-life. And they give reasons why the unborn is actually a person, and that even if even given things like incest, that doesn't justify an abortion any more than it would justify the killing of a toddler. So those are very good resources. I hope as many of you as possible would read and sort of share the information in conversations, even with your unbelieving friends. So yeah, just subscribe to a blog like Wintry Night, and just read an article maybe once or twice a week. And then with the information you get, you can just share it with your friends in normal conversations. And that's not the same as sending like books or articles to your unbelieving friends. That tends to be annoying. That's kind of lazy too. It's like kind of slacktivism. It's a sort of slacktivism. Yeah, you're supposed. That's actually some sort of neologism on the internet, but no, you're supposed to read the books and then explain them to your friends. That's the idea, not just shooting articles at your friends like it's ammunition. Like that's not good. So, secondly, if you want to get even more informed, right? You want to go past like the minimum. Lee Strobel's books are really good. And let me grab Lee Strobel's books here. I have 3. I don't have the 4th one. So we have The Case for a Creator, goes through all of the arguments. This is all at a popular level, by the way. These aren't like these aren't scholarly level books. These are sort of like for conversations with your peers and with your friends. The Case for a Creator goes through things like Dr. Craig's arguments for the existence of God, and also intelligent design, how that fits into science. We have The Case for Christ, which is a case from just secular history for things like the divine self-image, resurrection of Jesus, and it shoots down all these rival kind of like leftist scholarship or skeptical scholarship. We have The Case for the Real Jesus, which is very counter-cult, actually. It gives arguments against all these weird alternative views of Jesus, that he never claimed to be God, or I'm trying to think what else. It has... Oh yeah, he was married to Mary Magdalene, things like the Da Vinci Code. It shoots that down because like no one in scholarship actually believes it. Like even Bart Ehrman's like, yeah, it's fiction. Like I'm trying to think like Zeitgeist, even like Richard Carrier, who's like the most leftist. He's a scholar, but he's super leftist, and he thinks like Zeitgeist is just crank craziness. And this shoots that kind of stuff down. Then there's The Case for Faith, which deals with things like the problem of evil. And it's like, how is it a good God can permit so many horrible things, river blindness, for example, the tornadoes to happen in this world. And one cool thing about all of these is that you don't actually have to read the books if you just get them on audiobook. So anyone know how much it is to get a library card, how much it costs? The answer is nothing. It doesn't cost you anything to get a library card. And most of your libraries will have like these things on audiobook. That's how I went through them. Just rent them out, plug them in, like put the CDs in your car when you're driving. Say like, okay, for the next couple months, I'm not going to listen to the radio. I'm not going to listen to like music or sermons or anything. I'm going to go through these books, even if I can't focus and concentrate. It's like I can't. That's one of the problems with modern education. You think sort of like I need to get everything in this book in order to have it worth reading. And the answer is that is completely and utterly false. If you listen to it, even if you're not paying much attention, so much of it just seeps in anyway that it's always worth listening to stuff even if it's way over your head, because eventually the education, even if you don't think you're learning, you actually are. It sort of builds on itself even subconsciously. So definitely a good thing, a good investment, because once you get that information, that the stuff from like Lee Strobel's books, that answers almost all of the popular level objections you're going to get. So when you're sharing Christ with your friends and they have some sort of objection, it was probably covered in one of Lee Strobel's books. So yeah, you can have more confidence as you're sharing, and also can sort of maybe correct people if they have these popular level misconceptions, gently and nicely. The internet isn't the best place really for arguing about this stuff. You need to sort of go out to real life to find the people who are actually open to being convinced. And so you'll have an answer to your objections, even with Strobel alone. But for those of you who want to get even more informed, right? Biola's Apologetics certificate program, I know Matt's gone through it. I think maybe a few of you haven't? Oh, Bobby's gone through it. I have as well. It's a whole bunch of hours of just CDs they send you. It's like $15, I think, for each set of lecture CDs. And it goes over just every single apologetics topic. It's a lot of hours, but if you go through it, you will have more religious knowledge than 90% of the public. Just by going through that, because it goes through all the important areas of apologetics. Again, I'm not asking you to do anything difficult, learn, spend hours and hours reading. If you just turn some of your driving time or cleaning the house time, or even, let's say, leveling in World of Warcraft time, I'm a little bit guilty of this charge there. Into learning time. So as you're doing mindless activity, just listening to things like the apologetics lectures, on that alone, you can go ahead of 90% of the public without all that much effort on your part. So it's like, why aren't more of us doing this kind of stuff? So yeah, that was like Craig Hazen saying that you get like more religion knowledge than 90% of the public. And so let's say, okay, you're thinking, okay, I want to do that, but it's like, not being ahead of 90% of the public just isn't good enough for me. There might be a few of you out there. It's like, I want to be in the upper 1%. I want protesters outside my lawn saying, I am in the 99% who knows less than you in your lawn. So if you want to be in that kind of elite class of religious knowledge, that's no problem. Once you go to Apologetics 315, there's a thing called the Ultimate Audio page. Again, all these audios are free. Right? It costs nothing, so it's not like you can say, oh, there's money in the way. No, not at all. So you can download lectures like on iTunes by, there's a guy called Phil Fernandez with an S at the end. It's also, again, on the back here. He has these iTunes lecture series, iTunes U lecture series on pretty much every apologetics topic. There's things like ethics or things like creation, secular religions, different cults, even on like Roman Catholicism. He gives not just lectures, but entire series of lectures where each lecture sort of builds on the previous one. And so you learn, you can get some fairly deep knowledge pretty quickly, relatively quickly. There's, again, a lot of hours of audio on Phil Fernandez. So if you go through that, you'll be just ridiculously knowledgeable. It's like you'll pretty much be able to start teaching classes like this if you want. And you'll know so much about it if you do that, and it gets you up to speed rapidly on almost any apologetics issue that you want to get up on. And so another thing that you could do is, like, there's this video series called The Fuel Project. It's on the back here. The Fuel Project, what they do is they outline in much more detail than I did the history of the culture war. There's a thing called Know Your Enemy, which goes from the beginning of civilization, the conflict between the people of God and the people of Israel against the people of Baal and Asherah, and how that sort of worked its way through all of our culture. And so it's one pastor, actually a very knowledgeable pastor, going through all of this. And there's the second one he's working on is called Stay Free, which again talks about how we get trapped in sin and how sort of we get out of it as a culture. And so it's very good. Again, free. You can just go on YouTube, click, just sit back, get your popcorn, whatever, your preferably non-alcoholic beverage, and just, drink that and just watch, sit back, and all of a sudden you're learning. You're getting tons of information. Again, none of it requires enormous amounts of effort, but you're becoming very effective and actually very dangerous from the perspective, especially from unscrupulous politicians. Like, the reason I put on my reading list here books by, like, The Prince by Machiavelli and Mein Kampf by Hitler, is that these show you how unscrupulous politicians manipulate the public. And the last thing these people want is a public that's actually informed. That's super dangerous to them. That's something they don't want. So, and that's why if you really want to get into like politics, you need to read both of these. Saddam loved, like, this was like Saddam's Bible, by the way. He followed Hitler's guide really well, and he was, in a sense, very successful at what he did. But we want to thwart people like that, and that's why we get ourselves informed by things like the Fuel Project. But those of you who say, well, that's not enough, I want to make my career this, right? I want to do this and become super effective. I want to wield leverage like a J.P. Moreland or like an Alvin Plantinga. I'm trying to think of the guy, Francis Schaeffer as well. If you want to have that kind of crazy high-level influence and really just yourself make gigantic leaps in this war, to say at the end of your life, yeah, I made a massive difference. There's actually plenty of graduate degrees available. Like Biola has this master's degree in apologetics. It's a 2-year program. Almost all of it can be done from the comfort of your own home. 2 weeks one summer, 2 weeks another summer at Biola. That's all the on-campus stuff they require. And you can get enormous information in apologetics and connected to like some of the leading evangelical scholars in the world, people like J.P. Moreland. And so many apologists actually get their start with this program. For example, Mary Jo Sharp of Confident Christianity. She's a famous apologist. She's done debates. She's actually a professor at Houston Baptist University. And she got her start at Biola's MA program. That's what gave her the knowledge and connections to then leverage into having a career as a professional apologist. But what we ultimately need, I think, for young evangelicals, we need people who are willing to dedicate their lives toward winning this culture war. And this means you've got like doctorate degrees at secular universities. Biola can help get you leverage. Dr. Craig's very good, very well connected to secular philosophy. And subjects like philosophy or literature, history, economics, and sociology, we desperately need evangelical Christians to get involved in those subjects at secular universities. In fact, what we could really have is, I'm hoping that some evangelical who's also a creationist will get a doctorate from a secular university in evolutionary biology. I mean, again, the Darwinists are absolutely scared to death of anyone like that because their main argument against any sort of like creationist or intelligent design movement stuff is, oh, you people are just ignorant, you don't have real knowledge of evolutionary biology. And if we have a creationist with a doctorate in evolutionary biology, well, that's really bad. They are. It would be like Alvin Plantinga did with philosophy. He alone transformed enormous parts of the philosophy world simply because he was this evangelical who got super knowledge of secular philosophy, and then he was able to transform the world. We need someone to do the same thing with biology, with what Alvin Plantinga did with philosophy. So are there any additional questions or comments on that, on getting informed? Anything anyone's not clear about getting informed? Any have any comments? Liz seems to have something in the front here. Let me get a drink.
So, in places like New England and at Yale, it's just infested by, infested by moral relativism.
Yes.
And I liked what you said about it mainly applying to sexuality and kind of these semi-private lifestyles.
Yeah.
Because actually an organization I'm a part of put up posters saying, don't judge Stalin until you've walked a mile in his boots, and also don't knock cannibalism until you try it, kind of deconstructing that relativism. Yeah, it's a bit cheeky, but it works.
Yeah, it is.
So the problem is when you have people, when you get informed and when you have the arguments, when you see things happening like what people are referring to as the rape culture at Yale, and people latch on to the wrong cause, when they latch on to this kind of victimhood argument that this is all a result of sexism and not a part of this hookup culture or this sexually ethical system that is just completely relativistic. What would you say that you do when people just have a mindset that's just completely incompatible with any argument that you can come up with?
Oh, I would try the best I could to try to question, to put some skepticism into their own mindset. Start questioning the foundations of why that is. Often people who accept worldviews like that have sort of swallowed it from one of their professors and haven't really scrutinized it. So if you can get the kind of the pebble in their shoe, I think that's probably the best thing you can do. So, and that's the thing with a lot of professors today. They're Dr. Craig's opponents, right? They have their atheism. They're not really open to arguments. But Dr. Craig isn't out there to convince people like Lawrence Krauss that he's right. He's out to convince the future cosmologists that it's him and not Lawrence Krauss they should sort of latch onto. And that's why it's so important that we have involvements in the education system, in the universities. This is where all the judges, like the Supreme Court justices, they get their legal knowledge, criminal justice, from mainly secular universities. The people that run the secular universities are the ones who are going to determine a large part of what their worldview is. And so that's why we need to get people in those systems. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that was great.
All right, so, I think Steve over here. We'll get Steve, and then we'll go on to getting involved. That's a fun one.
Just passing on what I heard through my father. Never met my grandfather on my father's side, but he said we started losing the culture war when the draft dodgers from World War I made an effort to go into the universities to change the culture. And so they became teachers at universities.
Yeah, and they sort of get whatever worldview you have that would make you a draft dodger might also then sort of get into the main, sort of seep into the mainstream, sort of the intellectual water supply of the U.S. culture. So yeah, thanks for the insight. So after we get informed, right, we're already very dangerous once you get informed. But once you get involved, man, we've taken that to a whole other level once you're informed. So it's actually quite simple to have some level of involvement. Everyone can have a tiny bit. In fact, like because there's so many evangelicals, pulling your own weight is a ridiculously trivial endeavor. If everyone would pull their own weight, we could completely dominate the culture war. For example, the Discovery Institute is one of the chief enemies of this sort of like the sexual liberation or like the Darwinist movements, and they're making inroads into science that no creationist group has ever really done in recent history. It's like even like the Institute for Creation Research, just no matter how much money they have, there's a degree where they're sort of separate. But with the intelligent design movement, because they're getting into mainstream academia, the people like Eugenie Scott are much more frightened of them. So the entire budget, though, of this group is $4 million. Like that's it. Joel Osteen's church has a budget of $70 million. So it's sort of like, are we putting our money in the wrong places here? But how about this? If every evangelical in the U.S. donated $20 to the Discovery Institute at some point in their lives, right? This is $20 once. This isn't $20 a year, $20 one time. They would have an influx of $1.2 billion into that movement. So it's like previously $4 million, now they've got an influx of $1.2 billion. That would, the kind of stuff that would, publicity, for example, and like educational stuff that would buy would be incredible. So I'm doing my part. Here's my $20 I'm giving to the, this isn't a prop, it's a real check I'm actually going to mail to them today. So this is my part. I'm pulling my weight. Gonna seal the envelope. Boom. Done. Okay. Now for the rest of you, you're gonna do something like that, right? So there's also other ways of getting involved. Let's say it's not a $20 check. One is to take a life group through something like the Truth Project. Now, the Truth Project is a production by Focus on the Family. It deals with the bigger questions of life. According to the Barna Research Group, 9%, that's less than 10%, of professing, yes, I know. We can do math here, yeah. Yeah. Not 9% of professing Christians have what we would call a biblical worldview, or what they call a biblical worldview. And because of this, many of today's believers live very similarly to non-believers. And so the Truth Project helps us see how the biblical worldview would address other topics outside just Scripture. Other topics like the universe, the mind, evolution, art, law, ethics, and even truth itself. It teaches what would a biblical worldview look like on all of these issues. So if you can get, let's say, your teens, your adults, or even your teens to go through it, the Truth Project can help them understand the biblical worldview so they can discern truth from error before they go off to college. That way, if they're being taught error by their professors or things that may not appear at first contrary to the Christianity, we can sort of see what stuff really is consistent and what stuff is inconsistent. In fact, people who identify counterfeit currency are often asked, how is it we train people to identify a real from a counterfeit, like let's say a $20 bill here? How do people tell the difference? Do they, let's say, look at all these different types of counterfeits and say, okay, here's the real, here's a counterfeit? And the answer is they don't actually do that. The people who are trained to detect counterfeit currency instead just take a real bill, like a $20 bill, and they learn as many details about it as possible. Because the more and more and more detail you know the truth, the easier it is to spot the phonies, the easier it is to spot error. And that's the idea with like knowing doctrine. You need a fully developed Christian worldview to know the truth as thoroughly as you possibly can. The more you know that, the easier it is, like with some professors trying to shoot something, some worldview at you, you can go, oh, yeah, I know that's contrary to the Christian worldview. And the more of our youth we can get to know this, the more easily they'll spot deception, and the more easily you spot it, you find it like on television and everywhere. So I think Bruce had a he's got to say something here, right? Yeah. Yes, he's got to say something. Amen. You got to shout it. Amen. All right, hold on. Let's get on the microphone here so we can get it on the official record.
Okay, official record.
Yes,
okay.
do you
On
swear
the
to tell
official
the truth?
record, the Truth Project is a great series, and
Yeah.
I've suggested it to staff here that deal with, college age and under, and to my knowledge, they haven't adopted it. So those that have junior hires and senior hires, you should discuss it with the staff who are in charge of training in that to introduce the Truth Project. I think it goes right along with what Ken Ham says. Is he wrote a book, they're already gone. By the time they hit college, they're gone. If you don't have, it's not that they lost it in college; they didn't have it.
Yeah,
The foundation in high school.
yeah,
So,
a very superficial Christianity based solely in just pure emotion, or like having some sort of like lock-ins as your
Right.
experience. That's very easily blown away by any arguments to the contrary. I think we have someone up the front here actually. So yeah, you can. Oh, they have another series. Oh, there's a version of the Truth Project for high schoolers. That's good.
Drew, I think two of the biggest problems in Christian influence are passivity and defeatism or resignation. Christians, like everybody else, we tend to vote our pocketbooks, and if you're comfortable economically, you don't worry about culture issues. And if you go back to 1973, Roe versus Wade, after that decision, a lot of people said, well, abortion on demand, nationwide abortion on demand is, a permanent fixture of American culture, and there's no point in opposing it. And all the politicians jumped on the bandwagon, even people who previously had said they were pro-life. And the same thing's happened in the last couple of years with marriage.
Yeah, it's like
And
don't be on the wrong side of history, right? It's
Yeah.
like that's not a
But
good argument.
if you're standing for universal truth and divine command ethics, I don't see how you give up the opposite sex nature of marriage or the value of human life. And so I think we have to continue to try to influence, not using biblical arguments, but religiously neutral arguments to try to influence the culture. And I think the church and Christians are better prepared now than they were in 1973. They're better prepared now on the marriage issue. In 73, nobody was saying anything in support of the value of human life before birth. But there have been people talking about the importance of opposite sex nature of marriage for some time. And a huge obstacle that I see in what I do is this thing called judicial activism.
Oh yeah, yes.
Trying to overcome the influence of the courts. And if you take a look at those same-sex marriage decisions back in June this year, there were really three different products of the democratic branches of, or the political branches of society, the legislative and executive, that were before the court in some sense. You had DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, passed by Congress with 85% support. You had Proposition 8, adopted or voted for by 7 million people in California. And then you had the New York decision, legislative enactment, to recognize or approve same-sex marriage. The only one that the court said was legitimate was New York. And the court basically trashed Proposition 8 and DOMA and said that they were based on animus, which was a bizarre, I think, analysis. But I think the first reaction a lot of people have is just, well, we lost, let's just forget it. But I think what Christians need to do is to continue to speak the truth and stand for truth and not give up.
Yeah, that's great because that transitions sort of into one of my next segments here, which is that when we go into political things, we need to make sure that our focus is mainly on issues and not on candidates or parties. And that's a hard thing for a lot of evangelical Christians to swallow. And here's why. Like the real reason is that many Christians do get sidetracked into supporting some sort of party. And then there's a saying that great minds discuss ideas, ordinary minds discuss situations, and lesser minds discuss people. Now, if you look at most political advertising, it's for lesser minds. We have to be beyond that. We are called to change the culture. We have to be the greater minds. And there's also practical, pragmatic reasons that we should do this. One of them is that campaigns around issues, right? If you're campaigning for an issue, that has impact on elections everywhere, because you're changing the public's opinion on a certain issue, like, let's say, the abortion issue. Whereas if you campaign just around a candidate, let's say you have completely destroyed support for John McCain, John Kerry, or Howard Dean, right? That doesn't carry over to other elections. It doesn't really do much for future elections. So you have sort of a one-time victory. Whereas if you're able to convince the public, as what's happening now, due to ultrasound, people are becoming more and more pro-life. Candidates from both parties are now having to sort of bend to accommodate the public will. And it's the same thing with same-sex marriage, but in the opposite thing, because same-sex marriage is more popular support, and now in some places the candidates have to, even the conservative candidates have to run on support of same-sex marriage because of popular support. But if we are able to do our campaigning around issues and do our activism around issues instead of parties, both political parties will have to bow sort of to us as opposed to us bowing to them. And that's why I think we need to do our activism, our speeches, our public literature, blogging and the like, based on issues and not on people. Also, in 1954, Lyndon Johnson proposed an amendment to the tax code, which came true, I mean, it now exists, to clamp down on pastors' ability to influence our nation's politics. And the order says churches are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any sort of political campaign on behalf of any candidate. Now that basically takes the churches and just clamps down any sort of political influence. They want to take evangelical Christians and sort of push the group as much out of politics as possible. And so the Alliance Defending Freedom is one organization you can support. It has a once-a-year event where they challenge pastors to give sermons on political issues and even on candidates. And if your church gets targeted by the IRS, the ADF will represent you free of charge. And so that's one organization that's out to sort of bring influence back to the churches. Like the American Revolution, for example, wouldn't have happened were it not for tremendous support of the churches. They talked about political issues, and that's how things got done. And now Lyndon Johnson's amendment, which is around to this day, because we haven't really fought it, pastors are too scared of losing their tax-exempt status. So it's clamped down, and it's reduced our ability to wield any influence. So if anyone could manage to sort of overthrow that, that would be a huge, huge benefit for us. And so let me conclude here, because we're pretty much out of time. There's many things we can do to win back the culture war. The most important thing you can do is to know that everyone can make some level of difference. Everyone can do something to help out. What's really awesome is that because we have such large numbers, it requires very little effort if you just want to pull your own weight. Just donate a small amount of money to a culture-shaping cause, read the basic apologetics books by Strobel, and be willing to engage unbelievers in just friendly conversation about the issues. And already you've done a whole lot. But and we're already seeing the consequences of what would happen if we lose this culture war. In California, public school restrooms are transgender, which means that any boy who declares himself to be the female gender can use a woman's restroom and vice versa. And Christians are facing fines and jail time for refusal to provide services to same-sex weddings. Activists for this movement are trying to get traditional Christian views on sexuality to be declared hate speech and therefore subject to legal censorship. The church, even if we lose, the church may still exist. Even evangelicalism, I would put that in quotes, would still exist, except it would fall to something called syncretism, which is where you mix Christianity and secularism. So you can see this in people like, let's say, Rob Bell or perhaps John Shelby Spong is a perfect example of syncretism. Culturally Christian, but theologically, or his worldview, completely secularist. So, and if we lose this culture war, nearly all the churches will be culturally Christian but secularist in every area that really affects us substantially. And any church that says otherwise would be viewed by the public the way we view the Westboro Baptists. That's what happens if we just do nothing. But of course, not everyone, like we can again, we can do a lot even if everyone pulls his own weight. Now, if everyone doesn't pull his or her own weight, we can do a little bit more for that. We can turn the driving time into learning time. Because in the next 10 years, one study I read says you'll spend as much time in your car as someone spends earning a 4-year degree. So are you going to waste that time? You're going to listen to like music or stupid, just DJ telling dumb jokes on the radio? Or are you going to invest that time to increase your knowledge and increase your effectiveness, to become an informed citizenry? So the outcome of the culture war has not yet been decided. It could go either way. The fate of American Christianity is in your hands. Your hands, right? I'm pointing to everyone here. Yeah, your hands. No one's excluded here. So don't blame the darkness for being dark. Blame the light for not being light enough. And that's it. Thank you very much.